This is your Classic Metal Show right here on theclassicmetalshow.com. Of course, you know who that was. That was Slayer with At Dawn They Sleep. And we joke regularly on the show about Eric Braverman being the guy that wrote the book on Slayer. But this guy actually wrote two of them. Welcome back to the Classic Metal Show, author and my personal friend, DX Ferris. DX, how are you, man?
Hey, thank you for having me, Chris.
Well, dude, you are back once again. I guess you didn't tell enough of the story with 33 and a third, the book on Slayer. So you're back with 66 and 2/3, the book on Slayer.
Exactly. A numerologically significant title.
Sure.
And yeah, I felt like I was just kind of getting started with the last one, and this one has allowed me to hopefully get it out of my system.
So you're done with the books on Slayer.
Who can tell for now? I mean, maybe there will be enough history to write a third book about, maybe not.
Sure. Well, dude, let's get into this a little bit. The actual title of the book is Slayer 66 and 2/3, the Jeff and Dave years. That obviously referring to fallen guitarist Jeff Hanneman, as well as fallen off the Slayer map, Dave Lombardo, the drummer. So why don't we start there? Why don't we talk a little bit about why you decided to, I don't know, come back with what I'll call more or less the glory years of Slayer?
Man, well, this book is a full-length book. I mean, it's long. It's 110,000 words. It's 59 chapters, 400 footnotes, 3 appendices in the ebook version. There's only 2 in the paperback. There's 33 photos. There's 11 illustrations. And my goal for it was to write it in over the course of March and April of this year, have a short 12,000 word ebook, and just get it done. I started working on it when Dave Lombardo left Slayer for the third and apparently final time in February. And as something of a student of the history of the band, or as all fans know, Dave Lombardo leaving the band is nothing new. Sure. It happened twice before under some pretty colorful circumstances. And it always seemed to me like the poor guy who is, on one hand, he's tremendously talented. I think he's the best metal drummer ever. He's the most acclaimed musician in the band, but within the hierarchy of Slayer itself, he's always been the low man on the totem pole.
Sure.
So it seemed to me that those guys were always picking on poor Dave. Mm-hmm. And when he was apparently kicked out of the band, it was hard to tell exactly what happened. But when he and the band parted ways in February 2013, it was nothing new. So I thought what I would do would be to just, real quick, put together a very short ebook about how Dave always had problems with the rest of the band, add a little bit of historical context to it, and then bam, done.
Sure.
And then, 100,000 words later and 9 months, here I am. The scope of it grew a little bit, to put it mildly.
Well, sure, man. And that's always the thing. Guys like you and I, we don't realize how much we know about any of these topics, especially when it comes to, bands that we have truly followed all the way through. But, there's something, at least in my head, there's something about once you start meeting some of the players and talking to other players about, guys like Slayer, like as an example, if you ever talk to the Metallica guys about Slayer, you start getting to us nowadays. That's not, okay, well, that's cool. That was something I did. But then when you start telling the stories to other people, people are like, Jesus, man, how do you get this kind of access? And what a great story and this and that. When you started writing it, how much of that did you find, was just readily available to you, from memory and experiences and whatnot, that you realized was just stuff that the average fan just probably had never experienced before?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, it's a very thoroughly researched book. I like to think so anyway. I mean, my dad was a real world-class scholar, like a real academic type. And it was funny because all the things I learned from him, most of them were not applicable in researching the book, because metal magazines and fanzines and the stuff that documented the band's early career are not generally very well indexed. They're hard to find. Mm-hmm. So all the things you would do to formally research a topic like, say, a baseball player, say if you want to do like the comprehensive look at all the writing that had ever been done about A-Rod, That's easy. You know, there are sports magazines, mainstream magazines, they're indexed, they're cataloged, libraries have them, they're easy to find. You know, 1986 issues of Cream close-up thrash metal, they're not indexed so well.
Sure.
You know, so these are things that have been kind of in and out of the public consciousness at different points. But, you know, how many people have really seen an LA zine like It's All Over?
Right, okay.
You know, how many people were, you know, personally had their life changed by an issue of Cream thrash metal? I did. You know, maybe a lot of other people did, but that was a long time ago. So it was a matter of kind of balancing that old stuff, finding the right people that had held on to all their magazines throughout all the years, you know, people who had really had, you know, meticulously held on to their metal collections. You know, when I was finding these magazines, I recognized a lot of things that I had 30 years ago and I had let go at a various point. So it was a matter of finding those, kind of squeezing blabbermouth for everything it had. It's this incredible resource that has the last 10, 12 years of metal and hard rock completely locked down. And then taking interviews I did with the band and kind of synthesizing all that into one big story.
Sure. Now let me ask you, from doing all this research, you know, do you see, and I'm going to specifically point to either Tom, Kerry, or both, you know, do you see a change, you know, from the start to where they are now as far as attitude and what they're trying to do? You know, because obviously you've read everything from when they were, you know, probably just out there trying to be the evilest band in the world to now they're more of a brand. At least outside looking in, there's more of a brand. Do you see their attitudes changing, you know, through the research that you've done?
Yeah, I think probably the shortest possible answer to that is that over the course of the last 30 years, the punk influence has really kind of fallen away from it. You know, if you listen to Rain and Blood, you can hear a hardcore influence to it. South of Heaven, a little bit. Seasons in the Abyss, a tad. But after that, you know, the band has become, I mean, aside from the incredibly controversial and divisive Covers album, which I like.
Sure.
But since then, the punk influence has kind of fallen away, and they've become a lot more of a metal institution doing metal stuff. So they've over the years changed from 10 songs in 30 minutes, and Hell Awaits wasn't like that, obviously, but generally speaking, they kind of changed from 10 songs in 30 minutes to 13 songs in 42 minutes, right, depending on what album you're talking about.
Sure. But
generally that kind of punk, hardcore, street level, devil may care attitude, that has kind of fallen away, and the band has become more of a metal thing.
Sure. Do you think that is, and let me rephrase this, I think that's because they gave Jeff less input as they got along. And I think it was strictly as a business type thing. They saw themselves becoming this institution of metal. And my own personal gut tells me from interviewing Jeff several times, Jeff was kind of that punk guy. He was the guy. And it seems almost like they pushed him further and further back in the mix, or not in the recorded mix, but in the mix of decision making and writing, so that they would go into that more hard-edged direction. Do you see it that way or no?
Well, it seems to me that Jeff wrote less and less over the years. You know, if you look at those early albums, it was at least half him or half dominated by him. On Diabolus and Musica, your personal favorite album, you know, he wrote almost all of that. So I think when he had a lot to say, he said it. But as the years went on, the muses did not visit him as frequently. He didn't have as many ideas, it seemed, you know, from the reading I've done. The ideas just didn't come to him fully formed like they used to. And sometimes they did. I mean, Diabolus, he wrote most of 9 of the 10 tracks. So he had a lot to say in that. But then other times, you know, he really didn't write a lot on those later albums. I mean, Slayer, you know, one of the things that's interesting to me about them is that nobody will deny how hard the band work, and nobody will deny how much they bust their ass and just break their dick to get the job done.
Right.
But they work as hard as they can, as little as they have to.
Right.
Like when they have 10, they go all out for 10 songs. And when 10 songs are finished, they're fucking done.
Right. Right. Exactly, man.
And it was really interesting looking back. You know, I don't think anybody ever really put it together before, but when I sat down and I looked at all their tour dates over the years, you know, there have been times when they really don't tour that much. I mean, you read the book, so you might know, but I mean, what would you guess the tour for South of Heaven was like? I mean, big breakthrough album. They're acclaimed. They're really about to assert their dominance as a metal force. How big would you guess that tour was?
Well,
how long?
You would think that it would have been year and a half and, 200 plus a year.
Yeah, exactly. You know, opening for arena bands or just headlining. And to this day, I mean, Anthrax goes out for 2 years, maybe because they have to, maybe because they can.
Yeah.
Metallica will go out for 2 years.
Sure.
Slayer don't tour for 2 years. I mean, South of Heaven was, I'm forgetting offhand, maybe 60 shows.
Yeah, it wasn't a ton.
It came out late summer 1988, and come February, they were done. And they disappeared for a year and a half.
And that's even if you look at today's world, when they released like Christ Illusion, they basically released it, waited, and then toured, summer package run with whichever package run they were running that year. But that's about all they did, really.
Yeah, and they kind of tour frequently, but I didn't realize that they had not mounted a full on headlining tour for like 8 years.
Yeah,
before this fall tour that they just did. So I mean, they work a lot, but they work a lot as little as they have to, like I was saying. Sure.
And this is interesting to me lately, last 10 years or so, how little they go out there, and actually tour with like-minded bands. They'll go out there and they'll do, tours with Killswitch Engage, or they'll do a tour with Marilyn Manson. But, just bands that are not really like-minded to what their music is. And you would think at this point in their career that they would not be out there trying to win new fans or new audience. You would think that they've done that, no?
Yeah, well, I mean, since... when was it? 2009, 2007, when they put together that first package tour with Marilyn Manson. You got to do a lot to get people to go out and spend their money on concert tickets in this day and age.
Yeah.
And, increasingly the name of the game seems to be putting together a bigger and better package for it.
Sure.
They famously tried to get that Unholy Alliance tour off the ground. And I mean, it worked for a few years. I'm not saying it didn't work, but it did not become the next Ozfest, and they eventually just walked away from it.
Right.
So, I mean, what does it take to get people out? Apparently maybe you do need Marilyn Manson or a totally different crowd to tap into.
Yeah, maybe. I hear you, man. Well, dude, I'm curious on two levels, old book and now this book, what kind of response and or backlash have you gotten from Slayer fans with the first book and with this one as well?
The first book, all the right people seemed to like it. And people appreciated it to different degrees, but it was kind of an odd book in that it was part of and backing up, the book was about the book was about Rain and Blood, that album,
right.
How it happened, where it came from, what it means. So the book I wrote that was kind of like a documentary in the form of a book. It talked about how it was created, who the people were who made it, and then what it means. So you had interviews with not only people like Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons and Slayer, of course, who made the record and made it possible and made it happen and put it out into the world. But you also had people talking about the impact of it, what it means. So you had bands like Mastodon and even Tori Amos talking about what the Slayer album and what the songs mean to them.
Sure.
So that book was part of a series called 33 1/3, pretty prestigious music writing series.
Sure.
That each one of those is by a different author, and each book covers a classic album from the Beach Boys to the Beastie Boys.
Right.
And Slayer was the first metal one in there.
Cool.
And the target audience for that is, trying to think of a neutral way to say it.
The VH1 crowd?
Yeah, more of a VH1 crowd. I mean, the kind of people that regularly read academic books about music.
Right.
And so on one hand, you had that base of people that buy the 33 and a third books. And on the other hand, it was the first English language book about Slayer. So there was a little bit of a, we'll say, fugue state between those two.
Okay.
So a lot of the metal people were offended. I don't know if it was a lot, but some metal people were offended that it wasn't metal enough. Like, oh, dude, what's all this stuff you're talking about, like Def Jam and rap? And why do you mention the Toadies in here? What does that have to do with anything?
Right.
Well, it does. Pay attention to the story. Slayer didn't happen in this big metal vacuum. I mean, there was a context that it happened in. And then you had somebody like Trevor from Obituary talking about how, what thrash meant to him. And he says, growing up in high school, thrash was our music. We looked at the other people and we were like, fuck you, you suck. Go off and listen to the fucking Smiths, will you?
Right.
So I think that statements like that might have offended a couple of the people that picked up the book thinking, well, it's time to learn some interesting cultural context about thrash metal and the world that created it. It's really, really quite the interesting extreme form of expression.
Nice. But
I mean, in the middle of that, metal people liked it. What was really heartening to me was that some people like Howie Abrams, the guy who wrote the Merciless Book of Metal Lists, guys like Ill Bill that grew up listening to both hip hop and rap, the Def Jam.
Sure.
People, they really got it. And,
that's cool.
That's so interesting to me that the thrashiest thrash album ever was released on Def Jam, the greatest rap label ever.
Right.
So you had these guys mixing with Public Enemy and Russell Simmons and Run DMC and, all those guys. It's really colorful. I mean, the story about MC Serch from Third Base pretending to be Slayer and calling fans to wish them well and say thank you for writing to us. Sure. Just wanted to call and say, hey, I mean, that's one of my favorite stories from the two books. So, all the right people got it, I think. Some people, it could have been more metal, it could be less metal. I think that book is more accessible to the general reader.
Okay.
This one, I think, is more if you're a dyed-in-wool Slayer fan or dyed-in-red leather Slayer fan. I think this one's a little more up your alley. There's no kind of explaining what thrash metal is and what it means in the grand scheme of things. I do that a little bit, but if you have ever shouted fucking Slayer,
right,
this one's more for you.
Right.
I don't need to explain what fucking Slayer means in this.
Right, definitely, man. Do you keep up with any of the other books out there that are released about Slayer? Like I know one of our personal friends is Joel McIver, who obviously wrote Metallica and Slayer and stuff like that.
I spent a lot of time reading his book on this one.
Okay.
Part of what I wanted to do with this was early on in the book, I do a rundown in academic circles. They call it the review of literature. Right. If you're doing research, you say, okay, here's all the stuff that has been written about this particular topic. Here's what I address, and here's what other people might address in the future, because you can't always cover everything you want to.
Right.
So a big part of what I did with this was combing through Joel McIver's book and making sure that I wasn't doing the same thing that he did.
Okay.
So if you bought his book, hopefully you'll still buy mine, and if you buy mine, you should definitely still go buy his.
Sure.
Because we did some different things. Like, for example, I don't go into all the singles and the EPs as much, and he does an excellent job of that. We talk to some of the same people, and there are maybe 2 stories that overlap between mine and his.
Okay.
But for the most part, I really, I'd look through his and think, oh, man, he got this guy. He got that story. Well, I can't do that. Right. And, I tried to make my book a distinct experience from his. So I think this is a great book. I think it covers the whole story from some different angles, but it still does not excuse you from reading his book. There will be a quiz.
Exactly.
And it also discusses some of the other stuff. One of the most recent pieces that is just an amazing story was a writer from Guitar World, a guy named Jeff Kitts, in the months immediately following Hanneman's death. He interviewed not only Jeff Hanneman's bandmates, the rest of the guys in Slayer, but he interviewed Hanneman's wife.
Okay.
Which I think was like the metal press scoop of the year. I mean,
sure.
In the months immediately after he died, he's the only person to talk to her.
Wow.
And he was able to put those together into an amazing story called The Rainmaker. It was in Guitar World this summer, and I forget the exact issue. But so I talk about major pieces like that. I mean, that revealed a side of Hanneman that I had no idea that was there, and I've written a whole book about Slayer.
Right.
But Hanneman was he was an unknowable guy, we'll say.
Okay.
I mean, it's still unclear exactly what happened in his head and why.
Right.
And, if you ever want to know that, I think that's a story she's going to have to tell at some point.
Sure.
But as far as what we know and what's out there in the public, I think I scraped up everything that there is to know, that we can know.
Very cool, man. What about Slayer 2013? Any interest or no?
Yeah, I have my ideas about what they could do and what they might do. I don't know if they're going to do that necessarily, but I think it's a golden opportunity to do a lot of good things and really revitalize the band as a recording force.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I'd like to see them spending more time in the studio with Rick Rubin there, this legendary producer.
Sure.
I mean, he's one of the top names in the history of producing. And this is by far his oldest client. I'd like to see him kind of helping them hammer the songs into shape. Apparently, Hanneman left behind some decent stuff. Kerry King apparently is going to be kind of picky about that. He doesn't want, substandard Hanneman out there.
Right.
For me as a fan, I think that Jeff Hanneman at 50% is better than most people at 100%, so bring it on.
Sure.
I'd like to see Gary Holt play on the record and write on it. I don't think that's... Well, I think the latest... What are they saying? That he's going to play on it but not write the material?
Yeah, they said he's not going to write because they're afraid it'll sound like Exodus.
Well, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Go ahead. After those last couple of Slayer records, go ahead and sound like Exodus. Fine with me.
Yeah, as I talk about in the book, I mean, it's that kind of classic conflict. What do you want from a band? I mean, which is worse, a band making the same record over and over and over again, or a band experimenting and recording a record like The Abolist that you look at and go, no, that's okay, guys. Can we have more of the same?
Right. Right.
So I think it's an excuse to branch out. I mean, if I could make a wish upon, a dark star, I would wish that Slayer would do what Metallica did and do like a covers EP or a covers record of some of the stuff that they all like and kind of use that to integrate Holt into the band.
Sure.
And that's not going to happen, obviously. So I think the record is going to turn out, to answer your question, I think the record is going to turn out to be like a Kerry King record. I think it's going to sound a lot like God Hates Us All.
Okay.
Not like Divine Intervention.
Right. Just straightforward blast in the face music.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Nothing wrong with that. Well, all right, man. Well, the book, as we said, the name of the book is Slayer 66 2/3, the Jeff and Dave years. It is available on Amazon right now in digital format. When's the paperback coming?
Any minute now.
Okay.
Maybe, possibly by the time you're listening to this. If not, certainly next week.
Okay.
What week is that going to be? I'm pulling up my calendar now.
Was that the week of the 10th, 11th,
Yeah,
15th?
The week of the 9th.
Okay.
By the end of the week of the 9th, the paperback should be here. I have proof copies in my hand. I'm looking at it. It's pretty good looking. Of course, I'm going to say that.
Right.
I think people are going to like it.
Very cool, man. Well, dude, as a tradition on the show, we always let the artist pick a track to close out with. So why don't you pick pretty much any Slayer track that we could play, and we'll roll out with that.
How about Bloodline?
All right.
Call it right down the middle. Something not too old, not too new.
All right. Well, let's do it right now.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you checking it out. And Chris, good luck on your book.
Sure. Thanks, man. Well, right now, let's enough of good luck with me. Let's just roll right to some Slayer. It's Bloodline right here on your Classic Metal Show.